This is the Cell Energy Lecture, the first lecture of this unit. Before you start, please make sure that you have printed both of these documents. You will need to fill them in as we go through the lecture to help you understand the concepts. All cells need energy, and energy is defined as the ability to perform work. So what do cells need energy for? Well, there's lots of reasons that cells could need energy, such as mitosis, to repair, active transport, or movement. ATP is the molecule that cells use as energy currency. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. It's composed of adenine, ribose, and 3 phosphate groups. The key to this molecule is the phosphate groups, and it works kind of like a battery. When one of the phosphate groups is removed, energy is released. At a place where energy is being consumed, another phosphate can be added on and the energy can be taken to a place where the cell needs it. When the phosphate breaks off, this molecule is now ADP, for adenosine diphosphate. When the phosphate group is added back on, then it becomes ATP for adenosine triphosphate. This molecule can be recycled over and over again, very much like a battery. We call it energy currency because it can be spent and then recharged. ATP can go from ATP to ADP when the phosphate is broken off, and then the ATP can be recharged by adding another phosphate onto the molecule. This can happen over and over again, storing energy each time. Think about this. How is ATP like a battery? Is there something else that you can compare ATP to help you remember what ATP is? We're going to be talking about 2 ways in which complex cells make energy: photosynthesis and cellular respiration. This lecture focuses on photosynthesis, and that's the process that takes place in the chloroplast. Cellular respiration will be a future lecture. That takes place in the mitochondria. There are some simple cells, prokaryotic cells, that can also do photosynthesis and cellular respiration. This does not take place in chloroplast or mitochondria, but in the cytoplasm or along the cell membrane of the cell. Because they are prokaryotic cells, they do not have chloroplasts or mitochondria, as those are membrane-bound organelles. Photosynthesis. The main idea of photosynthesis is that it's a process that converts solar energy into chemical energy, or it's when plants take energy from the sun and turn that into sugar. In order to do that, it takes place in the cell's chloroplasts, and the chloroplasts contain a chemical called chlorophyll, and also different enzyme systems that allow this to happen. Photosynthesis is divided into 2 different processes. The one that happens first is the light-dependent stages. In the light-dependent stages, the chlorophyll that is in the plant's leaves traps energy from the light. Usually that's sunlight, but it can work with any type of light, like grow lights that you can artificially grow plants under. It uses the energy from the light to split water, and water gets split into 2 different things. The first is hydrogen, and the second is oxygen. Plants don't need oxygen in order to survive, so that's released as a waste product, or a byproduct. The hydrogen is then used in the second process. That second process is called the light-independent reactions. Independent because it does not need light in order for this to happen. It takes the energy from the sunlight in the first stage and uses that energy in the second stage. This can take place in either the light or the dark. The light-independent stage takes the hydrogen and the energy from the light-dependent stages and carbon dioxide from the air and uses that to form carbohydrates, specifically sugars that we're going to call glucose, and there's a little bit of water left over as well. That's also a byproduct of the process of photosynthesis. Now that you've completed the concept map on photosynthesis, we're going to continue with that and give you some more details on what photosynthesis is. Autotrophs can make their own food by trapping energy from the sun to turn it into chemical energy, ATP, and then use that to build carbohydrates, specifically glucose. Here is the general equation for photosynthesis. Using light from the sun, plants make ATP and then use that as fuel to combine water and carbon dioxide to make sugar. The reactants are carbon dioxide and water, and the products are glucose and oxygen. What's missing from this equation? Well, it's something very important that plants need in order to survive, and that is sunlight. That is the activation energy that allows this equation to occur. Photosynthesis has two stages, the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions. The light-independent reactions are often also called the Calvin cycle or the dark reactions. The light-independent reactions can occur in the light or in the dark. We're going to start with the light reactions. First, light energy, which is the solar energy, comes from the sun, is used to split off the hydrogen from water. So we take a water molecule and break it into its basic parts, hydrogen and oxygen. This takes place in the thylakoid. That's the grana of the chloroplasts. They kind of look like little pancakes stacked up. A grana is a whole stack of them, and the thylakoid is an individual disc. Inside of the thylakoid is the chlorophyll that is used to collect the light energy. The products of the light reactions are oxygen, NADPH, and ATP. We'll get to what those mean in just a moment. NADPH is like a taxi. What do you think the NADPH might be carrying to the next stage? Think about this before we move on. We'll continue with that in just a moment. Chlorophyll is what is inside of the thylakoid. Chlorophyll is a green pigment. A pigment is something that reflects some colors of light and absorbs others. The color of light that chlorophyll is reflecting is green, and it's absorbing all other colors. The reason it's reflecting green, that wavelength of light is not able to be absorbed, so it bounces off of the chlorophyll and goes back into your eye. So therefore you see plants as green. It's absorbing the red, yellow, blue, and purple, so those colors don't go into your eye. They're absorbed by the leaf, and so we can't see those colors bouncing off of it. Therefore, the color of light that would be least useful to a plant would be green. All of the light would bounce off of the plant's leaves, and it wouldn't be able to absorb anything to do photosynthesis. Here is a basic outline of what happens during the light-dependent reactions. We need light energy and water to do the light-dependent reactions. ATP, NADPH, and electrons go to the next stage. NADPH, here, as we have discussed in the past, is like a taxi. It carries the hydrogen ions. So we break water into hydrogen and oxygen, basically just breaking it in half. The NADPH carries the hydrogen, and the oxygen is released into the air. That oxygen is used for cellular respiration in organisms like people, so it's a good thing that we have this available to us. The second stage of the photosynthesis is the light-dependent reactions. The Calvin cycle is another name for the light-dependent reactions. ATP and NADPH from the light reactions are used along with carbon dioxide to form a monosaccharide, which is glucose. So the ATP is the energy, NADPH brings the hydrogen, and the carbon dioxide brings the carbon and the oxygen to form glucose. This takes place in the stroma. That is the liquid part on the outside of the thylakoids that fills up the chloroplasts. The products here are glucose, which is C6H12O6, ADP, because we used up all of the energy from the ATP, and NADP. ADP and NADP go back to the light-dependent reactions to get more energy and more hydrogen. ATP is used to build that's the energy source, and NADPH is used as part of the sugar. That's where we get those 12 hydrogens from. Gas exchange occurs through leaf pores called stomata, so that's how the oxygen gets out and the carbon dioxide gets in. Here is a basic diagram of what happens in the Calvin cycle. Carbon dioxide goes in, glucose comes out. In order for that to happen, we take the hydrogens off of the NADPH to make NADP, and we take the energy off of ATP, and then it becomes ADP. There are lots of steps in the Calvin cycle that is not really necessary for you to know at this time. This is a good diagram that illustrates the necessities of the Calvin cycle. Here's another diagram to help you understand the Calvin cycle and the light-dependent reactions together. We start with the light-dependent reactions, which are also called the photosystems. For that, we need sunlight and water. When those two things go in, oxygen is released, as well as NADPH and ATP, which go to the Calvin cycle. Carbon dioxide is also used in the Calvin cycle, and glucose is released. NADP and ADP are recycled back to the light-dependent reactions for use again. Here's another diagram illustrating the same process. For the light-dependent reactions, light and water are required. Oxygen is released. ATP and NADPH are both produced, so those go to the light-independent reactions for use in the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle also needs carbon dioxide and releases glucose that is built from the hydrogen from NADPH, the carbon and the oxygen from CO2. As we use the ATP energy, ADP is sent back to the light reactions for use again, as well as NADP is sent back to collect more hydrogen ions. Pull out this diagram and you should fill it in as we go through it together. This organelle here is a chloroplast. The chloroplast contains these discs called thylakoids. Inside of the thylakoid is the chlorophyll, which is what reacts with the light to do the light-dependent reactions. The light-dependent reactions require light and water. The light and the water react together. The water splits into oxygen and hydrogen. The hydrogen is carried on the NADPH, and the ATP that was created from the light energy go to the next reaction in photosynthesis. For the next reaction, that requires carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to go into the Calvin cycle. The carbon dioxide, ATP, and NADPH react in the Calvin cycle to produce glucose. And that is an overview of photosynthesis. Please contact your instructor if you have any questions, and please scroll down and complete the photosynthesis assignments for this week.